So thank you everyone again. I think we're now going to turn to the question of recruitment, and Rachel, you were keen to discuss this topic.
A lot of my graduates and my personal experience as well is that recruitment processes can be barriers. Certainly a lot of law firms use psychometric testing, and a lot of people with disabilities, myself included, people with cerebral palsy, don't think like the way psychometric testing tries to elicit from you. And also neurodivergence as well. People with those type of conditions, they find that some thrive on it, others don't. So that is a barrier to the legal profession. If are used psychometric testing, and also some firms have signed up to the disability confidence scheme, but you've got to really be behind that scheme and not use it for your own ends, because a lot of my disabled candidates thought the disability confidence scheme, just to give you a little bit of detail about that, if you meet the essential criteria, you will get a guaranteed interview if you meet the essential criteria for the job. So it's great, as in you will get an interview, but sometimes disabled graduates found that it can be being manipulated by employers, the way they're scored and stuff like that, so that they don't get the best out of that scheme. But if you use it correctly in the way it's meant to be used, then it will open up your organisation to disabled candidates. But it's also about asking for reasonable adjustments. Some law firms don't. They have a mitigating circumstances form box on their application form, but some don't have reasonable adjustments. So when disabled candidates, if they do want to disclose and do say that they need reasonable adjustments, then they have nowhere to put that if that box isn't in place. So that's something for disclosing your disability. If there's nowhere to put your reasonable adjustment requests, how inclusive is that company in the first place? And a lot of candidates find, especially if they have mental health and physical problems like Crohn's disease, for example, the interview process can be very nerve-wracking anyway for a non-disabled person, but the anxiety that elicits from a disabled person and the anxiety they go through means you're not getting the best out of that candidate. And certainly law firms also use assessment centres, and one law firm in particular, can't name names, but they look at the way you eat, they look at the way you socialise. So one of my candidates was like, I didn't bother applying to that law firm because I find it difficult to use a knife and fork in the same way someone else, a non-disabled person would, or I find it difficult to balance a paper plate on my knee while I'm sitting down in a wheelchair, for example. And the other example that came up was one law firm wanted you to write a letter and not use the computer at all. So that really did exclude disabled candidates, because not all of my participants or myself could write a handwritten letter. So these are like the processes that go on, and certainly like the assessment centres are sometimes not held in like accessible places. From my experience, you're always having to find out whether it's accessible or the law firm itself is accessible. So there's a lot of like barriers that I think either they're not thought about, or it's just like it's just like an oversight. But again, you don't get away with that with the Equality Act and the duty to make reasonable adjustments. Certainly, I think with the disability confidence scheme and guaranteed interview scheme as well, some candidates found that if they ticked that box, they may not be judged on, they would be judged on their disability rather than their skills. And that's not the right perception to have, because if it's used in the right way, it gives an opportunity for the disabled person to be in front of the employer and show the employer what they can do. But that's another like problem with the disability confidence and guaranteed interview, is that am I just getting this to tick a box rather than to do anything, to look at the person's talent and skills. So certainly there's been disabled people that I've talked to, and they would get down to the last two in an interview, and then that would be it. They wouldn't actually get the job on, and that was on a series of recruitment drives, not just one. So it's our employers box ticking rather than taking equality and diversity to the heart of their business.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I saw a lot of head nodding from both Elizabeth and Lois in relation to this. Could you just give me your comments on what Rachel's just been saying there, please?
I'm actually quite shell-shocked at some of the things you've said, Rachel, in relation to somebody's eating habits, which were deemed as relevant. I'm really quite shocked at that. And my wee one can't use a knife or fork properly. And if I found that out, if that had happened to my daughter, I would be at that law firm shouting the odds. So I'm really horrified at that, and I'm just sorry that candidate had to go through that. Psychometric testing, I am not convinced about how useful psychometric testing is in general. I applied for the Big Five, I think it was called at the time, traineeships, and I think I failed every single psychometric test or did poorly on them. I think I'm not 100% on how relevant that is to being a good lawyer. I think a competency-based interview is more appropriate. And what I normally do for it, because I interview, and particularly my last firm I recruited, I was interested in, if they'd had a part-time job and times they've had difficult experiences with the public, because I always felt that people skills were probably one of the most important skill that you can have in law. So I wanted to hear evidence of your people skills and your negotiation skills and how you cope with a difficult or challenging client, how you would respond to that. I think that's a much fairer way of getting a handle on somebody and somebody's nature. Also, I think a lot of recruitment, I feel, is do you have that rapport? Can you see them working in your team? And that's a soft skill. That's a relationship skill. And again, I'm not 100% convinced you can get that through a psychometric test. And the handwriting thing, I really don't understand, because put it this way, every doctor's handwriting is more or less murder. So, and they've risen to the top. And I think handwriting, I really don't see how that is relevant when we live in a digital world. Yeah, I'm shocked. And I think there obviously is plenty that we need to do if that's happening in 2022.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in here as well, actually, because I think disability confident, from what our members tell us, doesn't have the confidence of disabled people. Because in some ways it's a self-assessment. So employers do a self-assessment. So that doesn't give our members faith that it's been done in a way that's robust. In this guaranteed interview scheme, we can see the benefit of it, but the problems that our members have told us is that in a highly competitive application process, some of our members were getting compounded rejections. So they were getting put through. It wasn't helpful for the employer. It wasn't helpful for our members, because they were getting put through to interview processes where actually they weren't in the competitive line for it. So they'd constantly got rejected, and the employers felt terrible and the individual felt terrible, and it didn't seem to work. Part of the problem with the guaranteed interview scheme as well is it's this thing about, if I give somebody a drill and say, go drill a hole in that wall, and they don't have the basic underpinning health and safety knowledge, they're going to drill and they're going to drill and they're going to hit a live wire and they're going to have an accident. Similarly with disability inclusion, if we don't have a shared values and knowledge base and we go start putting these tools into practice, they come up and they hit us in the face. Because the disability, so that guaranteed interview scheme, what we've seen happen with we do an internship program where we ring fence internships for disabled people, and we get employers to say, ring fence an internship for a disabled candidate, and then we'll stress test your employment. And we take what we call the employerability approach. So we say it's not about making disabled people more employable, it's about changing your employerability, because you're the one that needs to change and evolve here. So we get them to take a disabled candidate, and where we've seen this play out is that somebody will apply who'll be disabled, they require reasonable adjustments, they'll do really well at interview, they'll score the same as a non-disabled candidate. And then in the actual discussion between the panel members, without verbalizing it, a panel member will have identified a barrier because of that person's impairment. And the scoring will gradually go down, but nobody's actually verbalized what it is. And where this happened with us is there was a really high scoring deaf candidate, and we sit in on the decision-making process so we can positively challenge where people are making these assumptions. And we create a kind of trust with the employer. And the person scoring, and a couple of people said, okay, I just need to say it. I know they're the highest scoring candidate, but I just can't see how they'll do this job. And we said, or no, they said, I just can't see how I could have a deaf person in my office. And we said, why? And they said, we do conference calls. And we said, okay, you hire that candidate and we'll work with you to make the reasonable adjustments. And we worked with that person and we got put in the technology, we made reasonable adjustments. That person's now a permanent paid member of staff after a 3-month internship. But if we weren't there, nobody would have verbalized that. They would have just focused on this person's deaf, not the barrier I see is a conference call. How do we overcome the barrier? So my advice to employers would be, if you can, speak to your local DPO or come speak to us and look at ring fencing a position for disabled applicants, and we'll stress test your processes and try to challenge and change your culture. We do employerability training, or you can even go to one of our local disabled people's organisations. They do disability equality training. Disability equality is different to disability awareness, because disability equality is going to challenge your underpinning thinking and values and not just give you quick tools, tips and tricks. And it'll be lived experience led. So if you get disability equality from a DPO, it's lived experience led from disabled people. The other tip, and I guess this is almost a plea, it's that I spoke about digital technology and AI coming in to more vital services. So our members are telling us that there's a fear, because what I talked about, supercharging inequality, we need inclusive, accessible legal services that get it, that have the values, because what we can't afford is for digital tech and AI to get implemented and start removing our vital services as disabled people. And we really need an inclusive and motivated and agile legal force in Scotland to help counter that should that happen. Because I'll finish with one example here. Hand sanitizers. When the soap washes first came in and they were put into toilets and you put your hand under and the sensor noticed it and they put soap in your hand and you washed your hands. So in a way, it's a really accessible evolution. But when those first came out, they didn't work on dark or black skin tones. So anybody who had darker or black skin tones was excluded from basic hand hygiene in bathrooms, where that was the only means of operating to get your hand washed. Now, that's basic hand hygiene. We cannot afford for vital services in Scotland to exclude disabled people who need them. And we need the legal service to up its game, to be more inclusive, to take some positive action. So we have you on our side should our vital services start to exclude us. I'm hoping that it's not. I think the digital tech companies are being inclusive, but I'm just aware that we need to have that voice to support us. And that's my final.
Checks and balances. Yeah, absolutely. We have to come up to the mark so we can represent those people that are affected.
Yeah.
A rallying cry indeed, and one that will no doubt be heard and hopefully acted upon. I am conscious of time. You've all been so kind with your time. I am sure that people watching this content will look at their own practices, their own experiences, and see what they can do. If we have time, we have literally 3 minutes until you have to depart, but would you have one or two key things that you would say people can do today, right now, that would start to make an impact and improve or address some of the challenges we've talked about today? I'd love to hear. I'm sure the viewers would as well.
The first change I made was sans serif font size 14 in your emails. That can be done after you watch this video. Next one, get into the way of asking people, do you need a reasonable adjustment? Do you need me to do anything to make this more accessible? And try and give actual examples so that the person feels more confident and asking for those. So there are two things that you could do almost immediately from me.
Fantastic, thank you. Rachel?
I would say look at the person's talent, not their disability. Disability and barriers can be overcome by reasonable adjustments. And again, Lois was saying about that is very little known about. But if you're worried about cost, you shouldn't be. And again, sometimes it's just simple adjustments you need to make. But look at the person's talent and what that can bring to the business rather than their disability. And look at your overall ethos and your recruitment processes and see if you can see barriers within that, like the ones I pointed out earlier, because you're excluding yourself from a talent pool that will be reliable, they will be loyal, probably more than a non-disabled person would be, and their work ethic and productivity is also, from what I've gathered, really good quality. And you should look at that person as an asset to the legal profession and not because they can't work long hours or whatever barrier you may think or preconceptions you may have. You can always get advice on that and overcome that. But if you just exclude yourself from taking on a disabled person, then you are excluding yourself from a vast array of talent out there.
Thank you. Lois?
Yeah, so I guess we've talked about practical things. I'll give a kind of cultural thing. I think the main thing for me is understand that the underlying causes of exclusion are not specific to an impairment or condition, but they are specific to an approach. So my first thing would be understand that concept. We need to change our approach. The next thing would be don't think about disability inclusion as just a nice thing to do. understand it makes good business sense. Inclusively designed services and products will help you in the long run. And yeah, it's think about the long game. Inclusively designed products and services, diverse teams tend to outperform non-diverse teams, diverse organisations tend to outperform non-diverse organisations. So think about, when you think about disability inclusion, don't think about charity, pity, nice thing to do. Think about sustainability, think about resilience, think about innovation. And then I think your approach will become more in line and keep you safe in terms of getting it right, rather than the pitying narrative, which will likely mean that you get it wrong. Yeah, that would be my 3 hints and tips.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been an incredible couple of hours, in fact, that we have recorded here. So many topics covered.